Good day. You can see it says titration standardizing solutions. So we've done regular titration calculations and hopefully have done the titration lab, experiment 20C, and we're building up to doing a more exotic titration lab, 20G, which has a lot of parts, but it starts off by standardizing our solution. And so here it describes it. And it says when we make up sodium hydroxide, we have to use it fairly soon. If we don't, the sodium hydroxide is gradually going to break down into other compounds as it reacts with carbon dioxide. It may make some carbonates and things, but the bottom line is we can't trust our concentration of sodium hydroxide unless we standardize it. So what we do is we standardize it against a stable acid. And the acid of choice is going to be oxalic acid. And oxalic acid, H2C2O4.2H2O. This is in yellow because I may have a typo on your sheet that I should have fixed. Anyways, it is a dihydrate and we have to include that in our mass. The oxalic acid comes as a solid acid and it is called a primary acid. So what we do is we take our sodium hydroxide and we titrate against our oxalic acid until we remove both protons. That's why it says the second endpoint. And the oxalic acid is our primary standard. So, let's say I made a big jug of sodium hydroxide, I don't use it in 1 year. I can use it the following year as long as I standardize it. So for standardizing it, I'm just going to do a titration and get my new concentration of sodium hydroxide. And then if I'm using it in the next week or so, it should be fine. Related to this, you are going to be doing a lab and there are going to be some modifications to that lab. And they may be on this sheet. And one of the modifications is we're going to use 200 mils instead of 250 just because of the size of our flask. We're going to use 0.50 grams of the solid acid. And what that means is we'll have to use less of our base. And so it's more likely you'll be able to just use one burette rather than having to do all the tricky stuff of going through a burette and then reloading mid-titration. And part 4, we're likely going to use p-hydrogen paper rather than a pH meter. Our pH meter's been acting a little bit wonky. So that gives you an overview of what standardizing is, and you're going to get to know that very well when you do this lab, assuming we'll have time for that lab. Standardizing, we can use our NaOH as long as we titrate against a standard acid like oxalic acid.